I love being an artistic director. I think there is something I find very fulfilling about bringing people together. And my dream is often I would love to make essentially like a national theater that basically is programming excellent work, but also just has like a really amazing training capacity where they're really taking time to like nurture designers, directors. I would love to do that, and I would love for it to be based in Scranton.
Welcome to Harmony Talk, a podcast of conversations with individuals who turn their passion into purpose, their dreams into reality. Our guest today is Michael Flynn, a Scranton native and a theater producer and director and co-founder of the Scranton Shakespeare Festival, commonly referred to as Scranton Shakes. It's a nonprofit theater company now in its 15th season of summer entertainment. Hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Champeau. This podcast is brought to you by AM Skyer, the third-generation family insurance business that promotes and celebrates dreamers and doers from all walks of life. And Michael joins us from his home in Brooklyn. Hello, Michael. How are you?
It's great to be here, Lisa. I'm doing well. That's accurate. I'm still in Brooklyn, New York. I split my time between Brooklyn, New York, and my hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. So we're gearing up for a 15th season, as you mentioned, and things are getting rather busy on our end. So quite an exciting time.
We're going to go back just a little bit. Now, you are a Scranton native, as I said, and you went to Scranton Prep, you went to the University of Scranton, and then you headed off to make your mark in the world of theater. And you have quite an impressive resume of work in New York. But let's just go back to 2011, when you and a couple of friends, as I understand it, came back to Scranton and decided to stage A Midsummer Night's Dream in Naog Park for free. And 1,000 people showed up. That must have been, what a moment, a eureka moment of some kind. Take us back there. What went through your mind when so many people showed up?
Of course. So right before that production took place, I was working as an actor in Binghamton, New York on a production of Hamlet. And we were mostly performing for schools. And it just so happened that winter we had a horrible snowstorm up in Blizzard. So essentially all of those performances were canceled. And it was during that time that I was thinking this would be really fun to do in my hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. And, I had heard about this production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that had been done with this theater company I was working with outdoors. And I started like pitching it to some people in our community of Scranton who I know were supporters of New York's Shakespeare in the Park at the Delacorte with the Public Theater, as well as some members of like local theater groups to see if there was any interest there. And enough people were crazy enough to sort of feign interest to me that we started reaching out to a few actors from the Scranton area, as well as some Philadelphia actors and a few New York actors about doing, 4 weeks in Scranton to rehearse one of Shakespeare's most popular plays, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And yeah, to our surprise, we were hoping that we'd get like 100, 200 people to show up for those two performances. But we were really overwhelmed and excited at the fact that we had over 1,000 clearly on two performances in our very first year. And it was from that sort of very modest profit that we decided that we would become our own 501c3 organization with like the little bit of profit that we made from that first year. And we came back a second year with a lesser known Shakespearean comedy called The Comedy of Errors. And it was a similar sort of troupe. A significantly less known title, I would say, amongst, a not really Shakespeare crowd. And we had a lot of really bad weather that week. And again, to our surprise, we added performances. We didn't just do 2, we did 4. And we had so many people coming out, and we were getting like storms in the middle of the park. And there were so many people I could remember in wheelchairs with walkers who weren't leaving. They literally just put up their umbrellas and were like waiting for the rain to pass. That was like sort of a different moment of impression for me of not only are they coming, but they're staying and they will weather the rain or heat to be entertained. So that was another sort of pivotal sort of learning experience for us as a theatrical organization about the need for this kind of programming. And so then the third year we came back, and that second year I had been assisting a playwright on a Broadway play in New York, and he actually spends some time in Lake Cary. He summers at Lake Cary, so he's close enough to come to Scranton, and he saw that production. And then for the third summer, he had asked if he would be able to do a world premiere of a play that he was working on that loosely dealt with the fairies of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And so he brought that show. We added a musical to our third season, as well as a Shakespeare play. And that's when we really sort of took this leap from a little summer, theatrical venture to sort of becoming more of a regional theater, to where we are now, where we're basically programming 6 productions within a year's time. But that was sort of what that experience was like at Midsummer, just not expecting to see that many people outdoors.
People's interest in Shakespeare, that surprised you? I mean, how would you describe that interest? And it continues.
That surprised me. And it's still something that will sometimes get a little smile, because you had people, one specific memory was of the very first season was there was this very young child who was asking for autographs from everybody in the show. And he was asking for the autographs, and he asked for, can I have Oberon's autograph? And that's one of the lead characters in the show, very big, showy character. But then he was asking for the Tinker's autograph. And I was like, the Tinker? And I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a Tinker in this play. It's like a very tertiary character, not a lot of lines, but like this young child was able to remember. And it wasn't even billed that way. So the fact that this young child was able to take that name and, want to get their autograph was really something. And I remember his mother, who looked me point blank, and she was like, I love this. Did he write anything else? And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, yes, he did. He wrote quite a few other plays. So that was an interesting moment. But, we really have a wide mix. We have people who have made their first time season 11 to see Othello because no one ever does Othello, and they really wanted to see Othello. We have people who, really hate Shakespeare and, are coming to it because a friend is in it, and then we're sort of able to change their mind. And that's sort of the tricky thing. I think a lot of people in the area, and maybe further along, I can't speak quite as fully on that, but I do think we feel like Shakespeare is something that we had to learn in school. And the saddest thing about that is, as much as I do think there's beautiful things to study and sort of
dialogue and writing and
exactly, yes, but the idiom in Shakespeare's time was let's go hear a play. It wasn't let's go see a play, it's let's go hear a play. And I think a lot of the magic of Shakespeare is missed when you're not seeing it performed. I was always pretty good at it academically. I could recall sort of understanding the language perhaps a bit more quickly than my peers could, but I'll never forget. I saw Al Pacino in Merchant of Venice, and there was a play I was not familiar with, but having seen him and another really brilliant performer named Lily Rabe, and seeing those two people on that stage, it was just so electric, and you could feel it physically inside of you. And I left the theater just still so energized, and felt like I could have watched another half hour of it, and I was like, this is what it's supposed to be. And there have been a few times I've had that pleasure since then, but then we've all been to a really bad production of Hamlet, or a really bad production, and then that's tough. And I think it's great for the experience, but as somebody who's trying to get people to come and see theater, it is hard because one bad experience keeps people out. I don't think anyone thought it would work, which was kind of a beautiful thing about it. I had mentors who were very much like, Scranton Shakespeare, never going to happen, and even this wonderful literary agent who works at the top literary agency in the the world. He's from Scranton, and he's doing quite well, with representing a lot of playwrights. And he's even sort of there's a beautiful contradiction here in Scranton Shakespeare. But I kind of feel like it's been working pretty well for us. And it's been lovely. 3 years ago, we started a youth Shakespeare because of the enthusiasm that we were receiving from the high schoolers. So normally what we had done for the last 5 years is they would come together and they would usually do a musical, because that seems to be a little bit more of the programming that's hip with the kids.
More accessible.
Exactly. But they started pushing that they really wanted to do a Shakespeare. And so now this summer we will be presenting our 4th completely student-run production of a Shakespearean play. We're doing Much Ado About Nothing. And this was super exciting because we have the students actually participating in it, which is great.
Now, do these productions, are they all traditional Shakespeare? Or do you kind of modernize them?
I would say it depends on the production. There are definitely a few that have been a bit more modernized. I feel like we don't do too much Dublin and hose, only because I think it gives a bit of like a dusty feeling. And oftentimes that can be a little harder for an accessibility standpoint for an audience member. And I also think there is a great deal of, just price to be able to like do that well and authentically. So I think we oftentimes sort of favor a bit more of an accessible time period. But, there have been times where we've done them in the actual time period the show itself is set, because oftentimes, I mean, other than the histories, and even then, they're not exactly in Shakespeare's time. So sometimes we will do, a Troilus and Cressida, and we will actually set it in what our idea of ancient Troy would be, or ancient Greece. So it depends on the production and the director's vision, but we run the gamut a bit.
You've also expanded from Shakespeare. You do other performances as well. I think cabaret, carousel. In fact, I think you're doing carousel this year. So how did that come about?
So I would say that started from a sort of a need of what people wanted to see. And I think there were people who, were really excited with the Shakespearean programming. But I think of the main starting point was when that playwright had sort of pitched us doing a world premiere of one of his plays at the festival. That was sort of an offer we couldn't refuse, just as like a young fledgling company associating ourselves with a Broadway playwright.
Who was that?
His name is Douglas Carter Bean. He's sort of known for a play called The Little Dog Laughed. He also rewrote the book for the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Cinderella that was on Broadway a few years. Lysistrata Jones, and the play that I worked on as his assistant was The Nance, starring Nathan Lane at Lincoln Center. So, he's written quite a few great things, but it was great to sort of get the opportunity to serve as an incubator, creative incubator for works that he wanted to produce, and sort of have an understanding of how things landed with an audience before maybe going to a bigger audience space. So, for instance, after this production of Fairy Cakes, which is the first show he did with us, he did another play a musical called Robin Hood. And that show then went to Dallas Theater Center, and then it went to Oslo Regional Theater in Florida, which is a really big regional theater pre-Broadway tryout space. And the rumor is it's coming to Broadway soon. So I've been waiting. I think it'll be 11 years now. But one of these days we're hoping it does, just because if that happens, that winds up being, something that, if moderately successful,
that your company gave, right? Yeah.
That our company gave, that we get promotion, that we get like billing, but also we would get a little bit of financial incentive to that, which would be, with a company that is so scrappy. And, we haven't necessarily spoken about this, but for the first 13 years, all of our programming was completely free to the public. So whether it was a musical, Shakespeare,
I know
work,
you recently started charging.
So we recently had to start charging a very modest fee for our musicals, and we were really nervous about that. But we're really glad to report that, people were very positive and understanding about that decision, and it just came because the grant climate is so unpredictable right now, as well as just individual giving. We all know times are getting tougher as we speak. So I think that creates a lot of hurdles and challenges for our audience.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you also offer free tickets to people who can volunteer.
That's right.
Work
exactly.
as ushers and so on, right? So you
that's totally right. So we are still finding ways to maintain that accessibility for anyone who needs to take us up on it. We want to make sure that we're a theater for everyone. And I think, I think a lot of times we think of Shakespeare as the writer, but we also have to kind of remember in Shakespeare's time, Shakespeare was the producer, Shakespeare was the actor, Shakespeare was the director. So I think, we're truly sort of immersing ourselves in theater makers the way that Shakespeare would. I think that he would be in favor of doing whatever you had to do to bring people in. And I think oftentimes we will do a musical, like people will come and see Hairspray and love it so much that they'll decide, you know what, I'll go see Julius Caesar. And then have a really great time at Julius Caesar, or at least feel something. And so it's kind of nice to be able to have the variety. It also helps attract a very specific style of talent. Unfortunately, I think repertory theater is becoming less of a practice in the American theater repertoire. And that's unfortunate because, you know, it was the foundation of so many of the great actors who sort of were the pioneers of this industry for us hundreds of years ago.
It's a great launching pad.
It's a great launching pad. And the great thing is we wind up getting actors who, you know, no one's coming really for the money. But, the people who decide to spend 8 weeks with us, I think a lot of times are used to sort of being pigeonholed in one camp or the other. You know, you're either a musical theater actor, dancer, singer, or you're a Shakespearean actor, and never the twain shall meet. And I think the truth is that there's a lot of interesting crossover that if you're able to commit to the sounds and the text and the rhythm and the language and fully invest yourself in that delivery, whether it's a Shakespearean soliloquy or, you know, you're singing On My Own from Les Mis. I mean, there's an interesting connection. There's a reason why a lot of our biggest theatrical directors do have a shared repertoire of musical and Shakespeare. I think there is more of a common thread there.
Are most of your actors from the area?
I would say it's thirds. I would say a third is from the area. I would say a third is a mix of people returning from the area, or at least might have moved away but come back because their family is still there. And then I'd say a third is new, so from all over the country. And for a little while, we were really having an international company, which was quite fascinating. You'd find yourself at a Scranton bar and you'd listen and you'd hear somebody from Australia and somebody from Shanghai talking about, you know, Romeo and Juliet. And then, you know.
You're also not in the park anymore. You have your own space at the marketplace in Steamtown.
It's true. So we loved being outside, and there are still a few people who are like, why aren't you outside anymore? And, you know, the truth is we would love to be outside, but we are given 8 weeks by the University of Scranton for housing. So that sort of dictates pretty much everything for our season, that time frame. And we've just found, I think the last big outdoor season was 5 years ago, our 10th season. And that was right after COVID, when we were allowed for social grouping, but we weren't allowed in theaters yet. And we had a very ambitious 10th season at the Scranton Iron Furnaces. And if you could believe it, every single weekend that we had shows, it wasn't only rainstorms, but it was lightning. And we're literally at an Iron Furnaces open field behind like a nuclear plant. It's just like, not a nuclear plant, but behind like a big old scientific plant that I was like, this isn't, and you know, we did get to do most of those shows, but the truth is, if we don't get to perform the shows and we don't make that money, like the festival is kaput. You know, it's that sort of delicate.
Like, what's the point?
Dance.
Sure.
Exactly. So we were very grateful to John Basilega and everyone at the marketplace at Steamtown for letting us utilize their space. And we had done like a site-specific show in Center Court that was really fun and successful, but you know, they basically were like, we have this place, we're not doing anything with it right now, would you like to utilize it? So we have been there for a few years now, and it's really allowed the organization to grow a lot internally with a lot of our structures and pedagogies and like just internal growth that was very much needed, that you might not be able to see from an audience standpoint, but that's so essential when you're dealing with a lean team that's literally spread all over the world, who comes into town for 8 weeks in the summer. So our managing director, Jonathan Stevens, is a wonder. He's based in England. Our educational director splits her time between Scranton and Philadelphia. A lot of our other team is in Scranton. So it's just really, having that space has really allowed us time to sort of focus on a lot of like internal questions and really reflect on where we want to go. And this season, I think we're going to actually have another space, which we're not formally announcing just yet, but will be soon, which we're excited in that it will offer a bit more seating for our musicals, because what we've been finding at this space marketplace is all of our musicals have been selling out rather quickly. So this will give us a bit more, give the audience
Space
a
for
bit
that.
more
Well,
opportunity.
congratulations.
Thank
That's
you. We're
wonderful.
excited. We're excited.
You know, this is a podcast about dreamers and doers, Michael. You certainly fit the bill. So let's talk for a second about you. You've worked as an associate director and assistant director quite a bit. You were on the national tour of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, Sound of Music. What is your ideal dream job? I mean, when you were growing up, did you want to be an actor, a theater director? Or...
Sure. Growing up, I think I was always invested in telling stories. One of like the first things I can remember is like the first day of preschool. All of the other kids were crying, and there was like a container of these like big cardboard blocks. And I walked right up to them and I was like, let's build a stage. There were like all these kids crying to their parents because they didn't want to leave. And I was like, just ready to go day one of preschool to like build a stage with these play school blocks. We
Wow.
started building a stage, so I can just sort of remember. And I didn't have like a background. It's not like all my family or my older siblings were theater kids. It was much more of like a sporty jock kind of family. So it's interesting that this calling came from somewhere. But I would say that I unfortunately, I feel like at a young age, the only sort of thing you know is being the performer. I don't think we do a great job at an early age of sort of showing people that there are different roles and responsibilities of what you can do in this industry. So yes, it's true. I started off as an actor, and I had a little bit of success with that. I was being cast in summer stocks, across the country. I was in an off-Broadway musical of a show called Freckle Face, which was a musical based on the life of Julianne Moore as a child. It ran off Broadway for a few years, and then had some like pretty big auditions and did some regional Shakespeare. And then I had this opportunity to work as an assistant to this playwright, which was wonderful. And I do think there is like a bit of a writer in me somewhere, although that takes a very different sort of courage. But it was during that assistantship that I was brought into the company of the legendary Broadway director Jack O'Brien, who's a 4-time Tony Award-winning director. And I was just floored with how he was able to control a room and how he was able to talk to actors about absolutely anything, and how he was so fun and enjoyable, but also incredibly serious. He really made one feel that, you were just doing a play, but you felt like you were going to war. You felt like there was a real meaning to what you were doing, a mission, and just the grace he shared with everyone in the room, whether they were a Broadway bona fide Academy Award-winning star or a custodian. He just listened and evaluated every idea that was brought to the table with beautiful grace and diplomacy. And I had the pleasure years later, he called me up to ask if I wanted to serve as the associate director on a play with him. And I certainly took him up on that, which was kind of a dream come true. And that play was a Terrence McNally play called It's Only a Play. And it was a big Broadway success. And there were a lot of celebs in that. Another show with Nathan Lane. But this time I got to work with Matthew Broderick and Stockard Channing, F. Murray Abraham, Oscar winner from Amadeus, and Megan Mullally, Rupert Grint, who was, the Harry Potter Ron Weasley. So that sort of brought a whole echelon of interesting Hollywood red tape, which was fascinating to just observe. And there were a lot of moments where during that time, I was working on both the festival and this Broadway play full of Broadway folk, and thinking I kind of missed the festival. And then having people like Terrence McNally, one of the greatest theatrical writers of all time, sort of ask me, well, what are you doing this season? What's going on there? And, to have people like F. Murray Abraham, Nathan Lane, and Matthew Broderick make donations to the organization was also rather meaningful during that time. So that was sort of a pinch me as this real sort of moment. And then I got to do another really cool starry play, and The Sound of Music was great because I was able to take a play all over the country, which was really fascinating, especially being 2018. So our tech week of The Sound of Music, right when we were about to go into, right after we were leaving the studio going into tech week, I will not forget, was Charlottesville. And just sort of thinking, how so many people forget what the book of The Sound of Music is and the themes of The Sound of Music, because we sort of only remember the kids and the puppets, and we forget that they are also fighting an occupying force. And those Nazi banners come flying on down over everybody's heads. And it's like, oh, right. We always forget about the second GHS. So that was a really interesting time to sort of think, wow, some people might think The Sound of Music is a little bit of like old canon, but here we are in America very much grappling with some themes in this that, we just sort of taken for granted. So that was a really amazing experience. But I would say, back to your original question, I love being an artistic director. I love bringing in directors. I love bringing in designers. I love meeting new people, whether they're new actors, new technicians. I think there is something I find very fulfilling about bringing people together. And my dream is often, I know it sounds very lofty, but I would love to make essentially like a national theater like the Brits have, that I'm so envious of, is this big, wonderful theatrical
Institution.
mothership institution that basically is programming, it seems like excellent work, like 4 shows at a time, but also just has like a really amazing training capacity where they're really taking time to like nurture designers, directors. They're being brave and taking works that they never thought would be a musical and make them into a musical. And I would love to do that. And I would love for it to be based in Scranton. And I would love for us to, as a country, go back to, some of the things that FDR thought with the Federal Theater Project. And I think I'm very political minded. So I watch a lot of political punditry, and people are always talking about, empathy and understanding. And I'm like, we need theaters. We need people to be telling stories. We need people's quality of life to improve. And, I know when people are worried about the cost of eggs, like, empathy, I think, falls a little short on that list when people can't
put it in a play.
Exactly. Right.
Or a musical,
right.
even. I see this. I hear the song already.
Careful, you'll be on a poster soon.
That's right. You'll be roping me in there. So you've been an assistant director. I think you've directed a couple of off-Broadway productions as well. Isn't that correct?
Correct. Yes. So I directed a few, one of which is sort of feeling really special right now. It was called Camel, and it was written by this, very young playwright who her name is Charlie Clive, and she was sort of like, a writer actor person, and we had the best time writing it. And now I'm so proud of her because she's literally starring opposite Steve Carell in the show Rooster on HBO Max right now. And she's done a few other like kind of high profile TV shows here and there, but this is definitely a big one for her. And it's so wonderful because I think in like the interview that she was having with Steve Carell, it came up that she, spent some time in Scranton. And I guess he was very much like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, a lot of people go there. And she's like, no. Like, I've shopped at Boscov's and I've done and I performed in the Scranton Shakespeare Festival. And he was, the story goes, he was like, there's a Scranton Shakespeare Festival. And so, I'm not saying we're the reason why she got the part, but it was certainly some good banter for her to share with him. Also over some spotty Wi-Fi. And she's now renewed for a second season. She's just a great friend and someone whose talent I believe in greatly. So it was really exciting to see, at that time, she didn't have any big credits behind her. She was just a student, brilliant as she was. And I kind of like look at that post and I'm like, wow, look at her now.
We need to get Steve Carell to come to the Scranton Shakespeare Festival.
We do. Maybe he'll play Lear or something. But I hear he's expensive.
Yeah. You're in a very, very competitive business. So what's the next step for you? I mean, what's going on in your life now?
That's a good question. It is very competitive. And it is one of those things that, like, even when you are getting those really great jobs, they're not paying amazingly, unless unless the musical goes on the road or goes to London. I had the wonderful opportunity to work on all these plays with a lot of celebrities, but oftentimes those plays don't go on once all the celebrities leave. I'm still like looking for directing jobs.
Sure.
I am writing a musical with a friend who's sort of worked on late night television quite a bit. We've been working on a musical of our own for over about a year and a half, which has been a very sort of different process. And that's been sort of enjoyable to sort of look at the bones of a play in sort of a different way than a director or an actor or a producer. But still having those experiences as like a big help in crafting. So that's been something I'm currently working on, and keeping an ear to the ground about sort of any directing positions. It is a big connections game, and my mentor, who I was chatting about, Jack, he's doing another HBO show, a Lisa Kudrow show called The Comeback, which just is about to do its third and final season. And just a crazy story about that is he's, I think, 86, 85, 86, and he was saying that he's never acted, and he got a call, and he was like, they were crazy enough to ask me, and I was crazy enough to say yes. So I think it just sort of goes to show that you never know where you'll be pulled. There is so much rejection out there, and I mean, that's true if you're an actor, so even more so if you're a director. So I think now the focus is sort of making my own stuff and trying to get that out there a bit. I think that's kind of where this next chapter is. And also, just sort of keeping an ear to the ground when it comes to producer opportunities and like artistic director opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, you have a lot of irons in the fire. You have a great background, and your enthusiasm is infectious. So I really wish you the best of luck. Are you going to be here in Scranton this summer for the festival at all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, I will be. I will be directing Carousel. So I'm very excited to get my hands on that very problematic, beautiful play. And, I will be there producing all the other shows after it. So I will, it's that time of year, right when things start warming up here in New York and my garden starts to bloom. That's when I know it's time to get ready to go to Scranton.
Back to Scranton.
Let everything get overgrown and die. Yes. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I know the box office opens on May 19th. And for anybody who's interested, they can visit ScrantonShakes.com. And thank you so much, Michael Flynn, for being with us. And as I said, good luck with you in your career, and hope to catch up with you sometime again. This podcast has been brought to you by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business that promotes dreamers and doers from all walks of life. Thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you next time.